LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock. Stop and search powers are in force in Birmingham as Maccabi Tel Aviv visit to play Aston Villa. The police are bringing in 700 officers plus dogs, horses and drones to cope with the expected protests, even though the Israeli side's fans are banned from attending. LBC's Luke Shannahan is outside the ground.
There are mounted officers here, police dog units, a drone unit. There's also a no-fly zone around Villa Park. And for comparison, a local derby between Birmingham City and Aston Villa in 2018 was policed by about 450 officers, and that was with full home and away ends.
The Justice Secretary says he didn't tell Parliament about the mistaken release of 2 prisoners yesterday because he wasn't equipped with all the detail. David Lammy repeatedly avoided the question in the Commons. One of 2 men wrongly freed from London's Wandsworth jail has handed himself in. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's titles have been formally removed by the King. Details of the letter's patent have been published in the Gazette, the UK's official public record. Andrew is no longer a prince and can't use HRH following controversy over his links to paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. He's been requested to appear before the US Congress to discuss the friendship. And in the last few minutes, it's been announced Shirley Valentine actor Pauline Collins has died at the age of 85. She had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 41 points at 97.36. The pound buys $1.31 and €1.13. The LBC weather, patchy rain in the southeast tonight, but most places will be dry. A low of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Humphrey.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. What's really going on with the government's green agenda? Speaking at the COP Climate Change Summit in Brazil, the Prime Minister says the old consensus has gone.
There was a cross-party consensus in the United Kingdom. The only question was how fast could we go? Today, sadly, that consensus is gone.
But he said Britain would be going faster.
Can bill payers wait? Can we win the race for green jobs and investment by going slow? Of course not. Inaction would only deepen these problems, drive prices higher, leave the call of opportunity unanswered, and leave our communities exposed to greater instability, flooding, rising food prices, growing migration flows, and growing threats to national security.
Fine words, but what about the fine detail? Persuading us all to drive electric cars used to be very important to ministers, a giant step on the road to net zero. Yet this very morning, widespread pre-budget briefings suggested that electric vehicle or EV drivers were going to be hit by a new tax, a levy of 3p per mile on top of other road taxes. The AA talks of a poll tax on wheels. But in part, this is the Treasury doing the inevitable thing, which is following the money. More and more people are going electric. 6 million people will be using EVs quite soon. So, the old, reliable way of squeezing the motorist, fuel duty, becomes steadily less reliable. But this new tax is bound surely to nudge waverers back towards petrol and diesel cars. It's certainly not a green measure. And it comes at a time when the oil and gas companies, now backed by the Trump administration, are lobbying hard against the energy profits levy, which makes the headline tax on fossil fuels in the UK 78%, amongst the highest in the world. There is a battle of ideas underway, and the question tonight is whether the Starmer government's actions match Keir Starmer's brave words in Brazil. Let's hear first from Chris Skidmore, who as a Tory minister signed us up to net zero in the first place and who joined me from COP in Brazil. Did he agree with Starmer that the consensus on climate change has broken down?
I do, sadly. You may remember my former party, the Conservative Party, was actually the party that signed net zero into law. I was the energy minister to do so. We were the party in opposition that made the Labour Party go even further in emissions reductions during the Climate Change Act in 2008. Now, neither of those pieces of legislation would be possible today. thanks to the centre-right having abandoned its climate commitments, which I think is a grave mistake given the economic opportunity that net zero and the energy transition provides. I did a report, the Mission Zero report, a couple of years back, and I said it was the greatest economic opportunity of our generation.
And that is still very
that's
much
what we need to focus on. That
is still very much the formal position of the government. Why do you think that consensus has broken down? Very easy to say it's all Donald Trump, but it's much more widespread than that, the breakdown of faith in climate science.
I think it's important to distinguish between the siren voices of a vocal minority, vocal in terms of the politicians themselves that get obviously the media coverage, and also the minority being Reform and a number of politicians who don't represent the majority of public opinion. Polling shows the public overwhelmingly back action on reducing emissions and taking action on preserving nature and climate. And, figureheads like Prince William in Rio are incredibly popular with the messages he's taking forwards about sort of protecting nature and forests. So I think there is a dissonance here between those that are chasing reform's tail, thinking that they are going to succeed in trying to win the populist vote. I would say, you're never going to succeed chasing that particular vocal minority when all they want is more and more determined sort of populist action against change. And this is change, and it is uncomfortable. I recognise that. But, we had this back in, when the motor car came along in the early 20th century, there was a vocal minority of people who were backing the fact that we should still have horses on the road. When we introduced gas boilers, there was a vocal minority of people who were saying, why are we introducing these gas boilers? This is a massive imposition. We need to keep our coal paths in place. Yeah. This is a transformation that we've gone through throughout history. And all we're doing is actually adopting new technologies that are more efficient and more productive. And that's the messaging which we should get across. Regardless of emissions reduction, electrification is better for us because it's saving money, because it's more productive and efficient.
I'm really interested, as it were, somebody standing to one side of British politics, if I can put it that way these days, about your reaction to the pressures this government is under, because they have become intense. You've got Donald Trump really urging the UK government to change course on North Sea oil and gas licences, the very issue that you resigned on yourself, and at the same time we've got the pressure from Reform. You've alluded to that. It's very, very hard for them. The big oil and gas companies say they do not want to invest in Britain at the moment because of the taxes on fossil fuels are too high. Britain has become too expensive. So from all sides, really, the Prime Minister is being pushed to go more slowly or even reverse policy.
I think that's, having been a politician myself for 14 years, the duty of a politician is not to necessarily take the word of vested interests. Obviously, there will be vested interests who always want to protect the status quo. This happened with Margaret Thatcher and the unions. The Arthur Scargills of this world, who was determined to say, look, there's plenty more coal down there, we can continue. If Thatcher had the bravery and the foresight to recognise that it was becoming ever more expensive to extract coal and that would have to change. And it's no different from the North Sea. We are literally scraping the bottom of the barrel. And it's becoming more and more expensive. Companies like Shell abandoned Rosebank oil field, not because of taxes, but because they recognised to actually get to that oil or that level of depth was going to be economically unproductive. And I would say that's the argument we need to take forward, which is that the North Sea was a valuable resource for the UK. We missed an opportunity to go the way of Norway in creating a sovereign wealth fund that would have massively increased our wealth. But that moment has gone. It's past. And it's been no one's fault, but we've got to be able to protect our own national interests against the vested interests and recognise that national interest means moving towards electrification, like most of the rest of the world, put aside the US, is moving towards, not just renewables, they're moving towards electric vehicles. This change is unstoppable. And I would say the danger we face is rolling back means that we're going to lose any sort of advantage we might have in being able to build these industries for the future on our own shores. We'll just end up importing these industries for the future.
You mentioned electric vehicles and you use the word unstoppable. I'm slightly scratching my head because the Treasury seems to be briefing very hard at the moment that in the budget they're going to introduce a new tax on EVs, a per mile tax on top of all the other motoring taxes. Now, I understand they've got to replace the money they used to get from petrol and diesel, fuel duty. Nonetheless, this is a way of, as it were, discouraging people from buying electric vehicles at the tipping point. It seems a very strange thing for a Green government to be doing.
Well, I think firstly, there's an economic choice that should have been made long ago, which is to recognise that road tax, which obviously makes up a huge amount of our overall sort of budget, as it were, for the UK government to spend, is sort of coming down, and that's a result of obviously us moving across from EVs, which we didn't have road tax to start with, and now the reality is that 40% of all new cars are electric in some form, electric plus also hybrids. We're moving towards that direction again, whether we like it or not. I think they've sort of recognised they need to plug a gap. The reality is that when it comes to EVs, it costs £10 to fill up 400 miles versus £70 in a petrol car. The actual costs of the batteries, the costs of the cars are coming down dramatically. So it's no surprise that people are embracing EVs, and the government's obviously decided there are fiscally responsible choices that need to be made about how do we maintain the road network for the future. That's irrelevant whether it's petrol cars or electric vehicles. We still need our roads to be able to function properly, and we need money to pay for that. So I would say, as someone who believes in fiscal responsibility, you've got to be able to look for ways to be able to deliver that. It's not, you're not going to have it free of charge.
Yeah. Chris Skidmore, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC. Now, listening to that here in the studio is the Director of Public Policy for Electric Vehicles at Octopus, James Court. James, we understand why the Treasury might want to tax electric vehicles, but people are very pragmatic. They're going electric, not just for sort of environmental reasons, but because it's been cheaper. If it's no longer cheaper, won't that hit the numbers of cars being sold?
It certainly would be coming in far too soon. We are not quite at that tipping point for the upfront cost of EVs, and I think a lot of people know that if you've got a driveway, it is almost a no-brainer to get it. For people without a driveway, you need slightly more incentives. And I think more importantly than anything, it's just a very confusing message that we're giving to consumers. Sort of,
EVs are good, but we're going to tax you more.
And here's a grant for it one day, and then we're going to tax you for them now. I think the messaging is confusing on this, and I think it will have an impact on people trying to decide what their next car is going to be.
But do you think the growth of EVs across the country is now unstoppable, or is that complacent?
No, I think they are the future. I think it's very, very hard to see where a mass market petrol car market fits in 10 years' time. These EVs are getting cheaper. They are, for me, much better to drive. They're more reliable. They're quite fun to drive. I feel there is sort of we know where we need to get to, and now for both climate reasons, but also for our own industrial strategy, how quickly we get there is really important, and this will slow that transition down.
Have we got enough chargers yet?
Yes, and I think definitely if you drive around and for an EV for the last, I would say, 18 months to 2 years, there's definitely enough charges, and also, even more importantly, the mapping and the data, knowing that you're going to have one when you get there. It's all got better.
Now, it's only leaks and hints at the moment from the Treasury because we haven't had the budget, of course. But when the AA talks about a poll tax on wheels, do you think that's wild hyperbole, or is there something in it?
I think there does need to be a system that we move to. This is too soon, and I think it's, at the moment, if you're trying to incentivize through taxation things you want, this is very much putting a tax on something that you want people to do.
It's odd, isn't it? It's inherently odd.
If you look at other countries where they have tried to bring this in, New Zealand being one, as soon as they brought this in for EVs, sales fell off a cliff. And I think that's something that I would hope people in Treasury would look at.
A real danger. Well, let's talk about the wider economics surrounding all of this now with Sam Fankhauser, who's Professor of Climate Change Economics at Oxford. Sam, thank you very much indeed. Professor, I should say. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. As I mentioned earlier on, Keir Starmer is under huge pressure on climate change at the moment. One of the big reasons is that Reform and other critics on the right say that we have very, very high energy prices in this country, both for individuals but also for business. And they're right about that. And that therefore we should be going more for North Sea oil and gas and less for so-called green energy. What do you think?
I mean, it's true, we do have high energy prices, but the reasons why they're so high are quite complex, and there's sort of the gas price is a reason with it, and the sort of green surcharges we have is another reason for it.
So simply saying we're going to go easy on windmills wouldn't help?
Easy on windmills would help, I think, particularly if they're onshore, where they're undeniably cheaper than any other form of electricity. Offshore wind, we have to see what happens in the next round of auctions. on the North Sea oil, I think that those are commercial decisions that those companies make independent of the policy environment of the UK.
At the moment, so far as I understand it, the big oil and gas companies are looking at the taxation of fossil fuels, particularly the EPG so-called, and they're just saying Britain is becoming too expensive and we do not want to invest here either in traditional fossil fuel or in green energy either. And they're looking at America and at other places to invest instead. That's a big problem for the government.
I think the problem is mostly not on investing in oil and gas, because we have 3 or 4 or 5 times too much globally, and it's difficult to imagine how the North Sea would rank and outcompete, the other big players in that. Where the problem might come in is where we do need the investment is in green technology, things like hydrogen, things like carbon removal, the net in net zero, the capture of carbon from the atmosphere. There is a lot of expertise in the oil industry that we have to tap, and difficulty in tapping that will indeed become a problem.
Now, I know you're an economist, but I'd be very interested in your view on the politics of this, because as Keir Starmer said, only 10 years ago, there was a strong consensus about climate change and the need to go for net zero, both inside this country and around the world. Now, it has broken down. I think that's partly the story of Donald Trump and MAGA in America. But why do you think it's breaking down here?
It's the Trump effect is certainly real. There is the story which is talked about the high energy prices, which is good politics to deal with it. But the one thing that politicians should be aware of is that the public is actually in favour of climate action. We did a little study in Oxford, and we found out that the policymakers' perception of the interests of the public in climate change, they got it wrong by a factor 2. They thought it's twice as high as they thought.
That is really, really interesting. Professor Fankhauser and Tom, thank you both very much indeed for that. James, I should say, I beg your pardon. Would you, Tom? I beg your pardon. Now, coming up, as one of the prisoners accidentally released from Wandsworth turns himself in, the Justice Secretary has promised tighter prison rules. I'll be joined by our political editor next, but the time now, 6:17.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why is there delay?
Straight to the point.
This government is unravelling everywhere you look.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
How can that make sense to anyone?
Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC.
Train to Brighton with the besties. Immaculate vibes, as always. But I bet my ice skating's going to be pure chaos. Oh, Em, you better hold my hand. Oh, I'm going up. No, styled it out. I've got this.
Last one to the other side buys the hot chocolate.
Back on the train, only fell twice. Low-key legend. We have to do this every year.
Download the Southern Railway app to book tickets and save a third off group travel and off-peak journeys. Southern Railway, where every stop is a story.
How's the business going?
We're busier than ever, but struggling to get the staff we need.
Recruiting can be such a distraction. We gave Job Centre Plus a try, and they've really helped us out.
Really?
Yeah, it was dead easy. We got our own employer advisor, Julie, who helped advertise our jobs, shortlisted candidates for us, and let us interview at the Job Centre. We've hired some great people, and Job Centre Plus really took the hassle out of it, and there was no fee.
Brilliant. That's straight on my to-do list.
Find out more at business.gov.uk/recruit. Eligibility criteria apply.
When you buy a BMW approved used electric car, there are no surprises. You'll find the largest range and the widest choice. Naturally, every car has been meticulously checked by qualified BMW technicians. Hardly a plot twist. And they always come with a battery health report and at least 12 months unlimited mileage BMW warranty. Just as you'd expect. BMW approved used electric cars. Nothing new here. Search BMW approved used electric. Obviously.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:19. Yet more pressure on Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as we must now learn to call him. Democrats in Congress are writing formally to ask him to come and give evidence about what he knew of Jeffrey Epstein and his crimes. Mr. Windsor, who formerly lost the title of Prince today, has declined to be questioned in the US before, but perhaps it's now unavoidable. Let's talk to Andrew Lowney, the royal historian and author of entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. Andrew, the other Andrew, too many Andrews in this, has been asked by Congress before, I think, to come and give evidence, and has refused so far.
Yes, he has. And I mean, he's been called on by the victims and by the victims' lawyers. There's been a mutual assistance treaty. I mean, he ran up to Balmoral to avoid the summons. So he's basically tried to avoid every stage of this. But I think he's now run out of road. I think this is the beginning of the end for him.
Do you think he's going to have to go? I mean, losing royal status is going to be a moment which means it's impossible to avoid this request.
Yes. I mean, I think, the King will be putting pressure on him. I mean, clearly it's an embarrassing position that the Queen is very supportive of victims of this sort of abuse. And so I think no one is going to protect him any longer.
I mean, clearly the Americans can't actually come and grab him. They can't force him to turn up. But presumably the effect of not turning up would be to damage whatever's left of his reputation. It can't be much.
Yes.
It'd be all over.
Well, he's between a hard rock and a hard place because, whatever he does, he's going to be in trouble. I mean, he can give evidence in private. He can do it down the line. He doesn't have to go there. But I think he has to give evidence now. And I would say Sarah Ferguson as well. She's a material witness.
And the two of them have effectively separated, as I understand.
Yes.
What does life hold, do you think, for Andrew now, living in whichever small cottage or house on the Sandringham estate he's given?
Well, I think it's going to be very limited, and I think it could be the beginning of a whole series of legal challenges. There's a private prosecution being launched. Various quite influential people, including a former head of Royal Security, have called for him to be investigated. I think there are grounds under the misconduct in public office. The sexual trafficking allegations, which the Met looked into 3 times and found nothing. I think people are putting pressure there. The Office for Independent Policing is also putting pressure on the Met to investigate. There's a National Crime Agency who could be looking at him.
This feels endless.
Well, I think it's the beginning of the end.
What do you mean by that? Do you think he ends up in jail, or do you think he ends up simply in a kind of weird internal exile?
No, I think charges will be brought, and I think there's a very good chance he will be found guilty.
That's absolutely extraordinary, and have to go to prison.
Yes, life imprisonment is one of the penalties for misconduct.
I find that absolutely astonishing. Let's hope it's not Wandsworth, given recent events. What about him actually ending up in prison in the States? Is that a possibility, or is that?
I think that's less likely. I think, but this is going to put him in a difficult position. He's going to have to explain a lot of things to this investigation committee, which are going to be embarrassing. It's going to open a whole new can of worms.
I can't remember any case of any member of the royal family ending up in prison in modern times. I mean, there may be medieval examples of the princes in the Tower and so on, but since then it's never happened, has it?
No, it's uncharted territory, and I think this is why the King was so keen to cut him totally loose so that there could be no contamination on the royal family should something like this happen.
Is an astonishing story. Has there been the faintest indication at any point recently of Andrew wanting to make some kind of apology or restitution to the victims? Has he said anything about this at all?
No. I mean, the extraordinary thing is he's insisted on taking out any apology in all the statements that were prepared for him. And I think that's why the King stepped in on the statement last Thursday and did make this point, which had been made to Andrew many, many times before, and he refused to countenance.
Well, this is an absolutely astonishing moment. Andrew Lowney, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to me.
Cool.
In the continuing clown show over the release of prisoners by mistake, at least somebody is doing the right thing. Billy Smith, 35, a convicted fraudster, has handed himself back in again after being wrongly sent packing from Wandsworth Nick. Let's talk to LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark. I say clown show, and clown show it has been. And finally, the Deputy Prime Minister has resurfaced again today.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. David Lammy has tonight broken his silence after that very awkward Prime Minister's questions yesterday. The news that 2 prisoners had been accidentally released early from prison, one of which, as you say, has handed themselves back in today. Mr Lammy was attending a prison building visit in Lincolnshire. He said that actually he'd only found out about this prisoner release on Wednesday morning. We'd thought that it was Tuesday night. He defended that he did not reveal the news to MPs in the Commons, saying he thought that this was the right judgment. Here's a little bit more about what he had to say earlier today.
The rate of release by error is too high. It has to come down. This is a paper-based system that obviously involves human error. We had 800 errors under the last government. This has now gone on for a generation. Our prison system is in crisis, so we have to bear down on this, but we have a mountain to climb.
And Andrew, he also claimed that the release was actually before he introduced these checks just a few weeks ago following the release of Kabatu. I'm told tonight that this error appears to have been that somebody did not upload the warrant for this man, as indeed they needed to do so. So get this, these new checks would not have picked that up anyway. So these checks...
This is literally computer says don't know.
Absolutely. So the new checks are meant to be someone more senior reviewing all of the information before a release. But if a warrant isn't uploaded, there's nothing to check. So it's more than just these new checks. And Lammy, when you just heard him just there, was talking about the paper-based system for this. So very much saying we need to bring this into the digital age. He also says, I've only been in place for 2 months. He admitted there is a mountain to climb. The Liberal Democrats are saying tonight the government must recall Parliament so that David Lammy can set the record straight. Of course, we're in recess now, so it might be a few more days until David Lammy can come to Parliament to answer some of these really
Perhaps a
important
welcome
questions.
few days respite. I mean, it was a very tangled story, as you were explaining to us just now, and it was at best inelegant in the House of Commons earlier in the week. Do you think David Lammy is in real trouble?
Look, I think when you look at the facts of the case, it appears that, it did take the prison itself a long time to reveal this news. So actually, David Lammy does have a get-out-of-jail-free card there. I do think that there are lots of Labour MPs and people I've been speaking to that believe that the way that he conducted himself in PMQs yesterday would have been easier for him to just fess up and say, actually, this is what happened, this is what I know, I see what the honourable gentleman is alluding to here. But David Lammy, you heard him just there defending himself, saying he was right to wait until all the details were revealed. So.
Yeah, well, everyone will make their own judgments on that. Meanwhile, one of David Lammy's colleagues, as it were, another Labour MP, Lucy Powell, has emerged. She was, of course, the person who won the deputy leadership election. And I think at the time we were all asking ourselves, would she use this as a kind of platform or a pulpit to attack the government?
And absolutely. I mean, it's just a couple of weeks since she was elected as Deputy Labour leader. She's already causing trouble for Sir Keir Starmer. Tonight, she said the party must stick to its manifesto promises not to raise tax. When asked whether it would be acceptable to break this promise, Powell told the BBC we should be following through on our manifesto. Of course, there is no question about that. And of course, Andrew, it comes just after that huge speech from Rachel Reeves on Tuesday, where she hinted very much that is exactly what she might be about to do. And of course, speaking to you earlier, Andrew, she repeatedly refused to do that. You put it to her that she was looking at this and she just couldn't rule it out, could she? So Lucy Powell, already only been Deputy Labour leader for a few weeks, she's already causing Keir Starmer a lot of headaches.
I'm so interested in this because I still think at some level that what's going on is the Treasury is floating this idea of breaking the manifesto and raising income tax. And if the reaction is too violent, too poisonous, then they'll pull back. But the fact, I know a lot of MPs, Labour MPs, some are saying this would be disastrous, some are saying it's exactly the right thing to do. They're divided, but Lucy Powell coming out may have some impact on the eventual policy. She may be helping to write the budget.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Number 10 will be watching the reaction to this very, very carefully indeed. We've had two, very different strategies from two different sides of the Labour Party coming out this week. And if it is the case that there is a huge backlash going on, I mean, if I were in the Treasury right now, Andrew, I'd be putting two of these options to the Office for Budget Responsibility. I'd be looking at focus groups, I'd be looking at polling, I'd be looking at how this is going to go down, not just with my Labour backbenchers, but with the public at large. If you break a manifesto pledge on this scale that this Labour government is even looking at, is this going to be the beginning of the end of your government, or is it going to be something that the public can take for all of the reasons what Rachel Reeves outlined on Tuesday? I don't think we know the answer to that just yet, and I don't think that Rachel Reeves herself has yet made up her mind, but they should be keeping all of these options on the table. It's very clear to you when she was speaking to you earlier, Andrew, that those options are indeed very much on the table.
Really, really big choices there. Sometimes, Natasha, when I'm doing an interview, somebody says something so shocking that I don't quite sort of pick up on it as I should. And I was absolutely astonished. The more I think about what Andrew Loney has just said about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the fact that the former Prince of Duke of York might end up in prison.
It's astonishing, isn't it?
Absolutely jaw-dropping, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, when we didn't actually get a chance to discuss this on after your interview with the Chancellor, what I thought was also astonishing from that was when she refused again to rule any changes to the triple lock. When young people are also looking at what's happening in terms of breaking this manifesto promise on income tax, how can it be the case that one promise from the manifesto is safe and another isn't? That is costing her £15 billion a year, Andrew, and I don't quite see how the Treasury, at a time where they're trying to make savings, is able to to keep that on the table. But clearly, when she was talking to you, it seems like it is not even an option she was willing to even look at.
Wild times. Natasha Clark, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, will Elon Musk become the world's first ever trillionaire? I'm going to talk about that with a venture capitalist who backs the new socialist mayor of New York. Time now, 6:30, and Tim Humphrey has your news headlines.
700 officers from 10 different forces are deployed in Birmingham ahead of the Aston Villa Maccabi Tel Aviv Europa League match. Away fans have been banned, but there are still a number of protest groups at the ground. The Justice Secretary has defended avoiding questions in the Commons about mistakenly released prisoners, saying he hadn't been equipped with all the detail. David Lammy stayed quiet despite knowing 2 men had wrongly been freed from London's Wandsworth jail. One has now handed himself in. The Culture Secretary has been found to have breached the governance code on public appointments with her pick for a football regulator. Lisa Nandy failed to disclose that David Cogan had donated to her Labour leadership campaign in 2020, but the report says she did so unknowingly. LBC weather, patchy rain in the southeast tonight, but most places will be dry, a low of 8 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
An extended interview with Malala Yousafzai, the champion of girls' education, the Nobel Prize winner, but also the struggles she's had to face in her own life.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
Train to Cambridge and then all aboard the paddleboards. A little bit different, should be fun. Or wobbly, or wet.
The wetsuit's a good look on you, Steve. Oh, actually, this is very relaxed. George is up the River Cam without a paddle.
Train home, that was such a laugh. I think I might even have a new hobby. Download the Thameslink Railway app to book tickets and save a third off group travel on off-peak journeys. Thameslink Railway, where every stop is a story.
How's the business going?
We're busier than ever, but struggling to get the staff we need.
Recruiting can be such a distraction. We gave Job Centre Plus a try, and they've really helped us out.
Really?
Yeah, it was dead easy. We got our own employer advisor, Julie, who helps advertise our jobs, shortlisted candidates for us, and let us interview at the Job Centre. We've hired some great people, and Job Centre Plus really took the hassle out of it, and there was no fee.
Brilliant. That's straight on my to-do list.
Find out more at business.gov.uk/recruit. Eligibility criteria apply.
Buying a home on a holiday park was the retreat you always wanted. But then came unexpected site fee increases. And that was before the dramatic loss in value. If you bought a home on a holiday park in the UK, you may have been missold. holidayparkadvicecentre.co.uk could help you receive thousands in compensation. Text ASSIST to 78900. That's ASSIST to 78900.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:33. How much does one man need? Tonight it looks as if Elon Musk might become the world's first dollar trillionaire. He, of course, was a big Donald Trump supporter, but my next guest, the US venture capitalist Bradley Tusk, has gone in the other direction. He once ran campaigns for Mike Bloomberg and other more centrist Democrats, but now he supports the radical socialist Zohran Mamdani, the mayor-elect of New York, and he joins me now. Bradley, thanks for talking to LBC tonight. Can I ask you, first of all, Mr. Mamdani was making a big deal in his acceptance speech of all the millionaires and the billionaires who had poured money into trying to stop him. Now, you're quite rare in being a well-off guy who went the other way. Just tell people why.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be clear, I don't know that I would have picked Mamdani, out of a hat to be the mayor, but ultimately he is running the kind of campaign that we, I think, need, especially among Democrats, right? He has a positive vision for New York. He has an affirmative agenda. He smiles. He's likable. And when you contrast that to both the people running against him in this race or the Democrats in Washington, all they do is complain. All they do is whine. All they do is tell you how terrible everyone and everything is and how morally inferior everyone is. And voters hate that, right? And so for the first time now, we have someone who has ideas. Will all of his ideas be achievable in the way he proposed them? No, but I think they're achievable one way or another, and they don't have to happen on day one either. And so I think, we could use some youth, some enthusiasm, some new ideas. There are a lot of things he believes that I don't support, but there are a lot of ideas that he has that to me could make a big difference.
You've done very well. You've been very successful. Are you concerned about inequality in the way American society is going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think how we can keep going this way. And I think especially with AI, I mean, right now, if we don't do anything, it seems to me you could have a world with Elon and 25 other trillionaires and 19% unemployment. And to me, that just means the French Revolution's coming, right? And so if you don't want a society where people are struggling to put food on the table, struggling to make rent, struggling to pay the utilities, and we shouldn't have that here because this is the richest, most abundant country in the history of the world, then we should be in a position to make sure that people at least have the basics. So when Andrew Yang first came to prominence, his big idea was universal basic income predicated on the notion that AI will cause a lot of short-term job displacement. I thought that was the right idea then. I think that's the right idea now. Out of my foundation, we fund and run campaigns in states all over the U.S. to mandate that every kid get breakfast and lunch for free at school, because we should never have hungry kids. And we've had some success in passing those bills. But the notion that anybody would oppose the idea of a child getting fed is crazy to me, right? Like, what kind of world do we live in? And so if Elon Musk says he needs $1 trillion because he's going to solve global hunger or something like that, great, have at it. But I don't know what you could possibly buy with $1 trillion that you couldn't buy with $100 billion or probably even $10 billion.
Yes, there is something literally grotesque about all of those kinds of sums. Let me ask you a little bit about your own journey, because you built up your own business. I think investing in relatively small startups is how you've made your pile, as it were. But you have your not-for-profit or your charitable wing. And as you were saying, you focused on food poverty and children. And I wonder why that subject in particular, whether you came across it. I know you're a Brooklyn guy, whether you came across it in New York.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've been interested in kind of food stuff for a long time. So since 1991, I've been volunteering weekly at soup kitchens. And I'm a first generation American. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. I worked in government for the first part of my career and didn't make much money. And then when I started my first company, we did pretty well pretty quickly. And I started writing checks to the New York City Food Bank. And it's a lovely organization. And they invited me to some meetings. And having had spent a career in government and politics, my takeaway was these are absolutely wonderful people. And almost by definition, because they're so nice, they're terrible at politics. And so when they had legislation to feed kids, it never went anywhere. Yeah. And so my question was, if the people who work with me and have the skill sets that we have were to run these campaigns, and if I were to personally pay for all of the things that a good corporate campaign would have, lobbyists, PR, social media, earned media, grassroots, all the usual stuff, could those bills pass? And so the answer has been yes. We've passed 29 bills in 22 states, 4.75 million people every single day now get food as a result of those bills. 93% of them are kids, and about $9 million of my money in this case has helped unlock about $6.8 billion in new government spending on hunger programs. So the ability to have an impact is very real. I just wish more of us were willing to do it.
Absolutely. Go you, good for you. What's your message to the billionaires, not trillionaires, but the billionaires and the multimillionaires who put so much time and effort into stopping Mandami because they say, here's this radical socialist, it'll be the end of the world if he takes over.
Right.
And they must now be having a little bit of a tremor.
They are. So I would have a narrow message and a broader message, if that's okay. The narrow message, and I've been saying this to them for months now, is you need to understand how municipal government actually works. So what that he's a socialist? I'm not a socialist, but guess what? He doesn't control interest rates. He doesn't control the supply chain. He can't even raise taxes without the state government approving it. So the notion that he's all of a sudden going to turn New York City into this radical socialist utopia, even if he wanted to, he doesn't have the power to do so. The job of the mayor is to pick up the trash. It's to make sure the lights turn from green to red. It's to make sure clean water goes goes through the taps. The first thing is they just don't understand what city government actually is. The second thing, to me, from a much broader standpoint, this is something that I try to teach my kids all the time, which is, look, I didn't have money, now I do. It's good to have it. Like, I'm not going to pretend otherwise. With that said, if you look at all of happiness science and all of behavioral economics, there are two proven things that make human beings happy, assuming you have the basics, right? Which is unconditional love and support in relationships, and work or something that you do that gives you meaning and purpose. The people who have those things tend to consistently be pretty happy. The people who don't, no matter how much money you have, even if you're a trillionaire, it doesn't really matter. So if the goal in life is to be happy and to make the most of the brief time that we have on this earth, that should be by investing in relationships and investing in things that give you real meaning and fulfillment, not just by buying more and more stuff.
That's beautifully put. There's a severe danger. I'm going to get myself a bright red cap made, which is going to read Tusk, not Musk, on the top of it.
I'll take it. I'll if you get one, send me one too.
And I'll send you one. Well, listen, very good luck. And it was great to hear such a positive message from New York. Thank you so much, Bradley, for talking to me. A record number of people have been referred to the counter-terrorism scheme PREVENT. 8,778 referrals in the year up to March. That's up more than a quarter on the previous year. The referrals, which can come from schools or police or local councils and families, surged by 34% after the Southport murders in July. The biggest proportion were among children and people with no ideology, but 21% were for extreme right-wing beliefs and 10% for Islamist extremism. Let's hear now from Sir Peter Fahy, the former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police and former head of PREVENT. Was he surprised by the sudden jump in the figures?
I don't think it's a surprise. We've seen other evidence that there are particularly more young people causing concern. We see that through figures like school exclusions and suspensions, and what we know is out there in terms of exposure to violent material. But at the same time, I think we probably have got in these figures a lot of professionals just playing safe, particularly after the Southport attack, and referring more people into the scheme. What we see in the figures is it carries on a trend where it's more and more young people. The most likeliest age here is between 11 and 15, and also that a lot of the people being referred are of no fixed ideology. So we need to remember that PREVENT is about terrorism. Terrorism needs to have an ideology. And what we're seeing is more and more evidence that there are more young people who essentially have just got a fixation with violence and are very chaotic in terms of what's driving that and what they actually believe.
So this is a really big problem. If you've got young people, they're not Islamists, they're not far right, they're just obsessed by violence. Is this because they're just watching lots and lots of violent stuff online, on the dark web perhaps, more and more extreme things, and being frankly poisoned by it?
That maybe, I don't think we fully understand really, Andrew, what is going on. And I think we need to put it in the context that actually violent crime is coming down. We've got a very low number of homicides at the moment. And thankfully, there are very few terrorist attacks. I think what it's showing is we have got, though, a large number of young people, or a relatively large number of young people, who've got this obsession with violence. And certainly in my time as Chief Constable of Greater Manchester, I saw a number of individuals who carried out horrendously violent acts. You couldn't say they had a particular ideology. They were just violent individuals, and often what they were seeking was notoriety for that violence. And so I think what this says as well is that the old definition of terrorism no longer is really applying. And therefore, we now need a much broader programme, which is just looking at people who've got this obsession with violence, putting in a load of different measures to try and deal with them, and particularly trying to obviously head them off at an earlier stage.
Is this something that when you were head of PREVENT, you started to see happening? In other words, is it a longer-term trend?
Not really, no. Certainly when I was there, there was a lot more, obviously, around IS and all the material that was coming out of IS on the internet and the situation in Syria. But clearly the world has changed rapidly since then, and radically. We're not just seeing that in the UK, we're seeing that across Europe and other parts of the world. And as I say, a number of reports have now said we need a much broader programme. I think the other thing which is happening at the moment, Andrew, is we see from the evidence even today at the Southport inquiry, that there is a family that had concerns about a member of their family and didn't really know what to deal with it. And I think within the figures, it's disappointing to see that the number of referrals coming from families and local communities has actually gone down.
Yeah.
And we need a scheme where when there are parents, families, family members, whatever, people in the community that have concern about a young person, that they've got confidence to report that and know that that will be taken seriously and proportionately.
You've said in the past that you think Prevent needs to be updated and modernised. Is this part of what you mean? Do we need, in effect, to have a kind of advertising plan for Prevent to get the idea into families, into communities more deeply?
Yeah, but we need a much broader programme. I've been part of the commission which actually will publish its report on Tuesday, and this will be one of its recommendations. We need a much broader programme, and we know actually what works. It is about good role models, it is about youth services, it's about sports and other activities which divert young people in particular from all the poisonous material which is out there, and obviously is more likely to sort of fester when young people are just in their rooms staring at computers. So this issue is solvable, but it'd be much better if we try and help young people at a far earlier stage than having to sadly experience huge tragedies and enormous expense when a very violent incident occurs.
And when we look at those who are ideologically driven, I was surprised to see that people with far-right ideologies are now about twice as likely to be on Prevent than Islamists, for instance. Is that just a reflection of the general politics of the mid-2020s?
I think it is, although I say again, as you've sort of seen from the figures, the biggest group are of no fixed ideology, but certainly, absolutely, there is more extreme right-wing material out there, some very hateful stuff. And there's no question that there are a group of young men in particular, because, overwhelmingly, this is about men. There are a group of young men that are very vulnerable to really be poisoned by this sort of material, and a small number who then are prepared to turn that into violence.
So, Peter, thank you very much for talking to LBC. Now, in a few moments, I'll be joined by my political panel on a week where the Chancellor looks set to break her manifesto pledges and the Labour government suffered further embarrassments with more accidental releases of sex offenders from prison. Time now, 6:46.
Coming up at 7, Ali Mirage, leading Britain's conversation. Next on LBC.
For anyone needing assistance when travelling with TfL, such as people with visual or mobility impairments, our Turn Up and Go service has staff on hand to help. It's available at all London Underground, London Overground and Elizabeth Line stations, and there's no need to book. Just turn up and go. That is how we're making the greener way to travel more accessible to all. Search TfL Improvement Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. Greener than total estimated petrol and diesel car emissions.
You plan a holiday, you plan a commute. Meal plans, career plans, even workouts need a plan. So doesn't it stand to reason that your money has one too? Because the sad truth is, if it doesn't, it's just sitting there, barely growing, if at all. That's why you need a money plan. And Quilter can help. It's a lot easier to stick to than a workout plan. Money needs a plan. Quilter. Pensions, investments, advice. Find out more at quilter.com.
At Laithwaite's, we go to great lengths to bring you great wine. We go far and wide. Searching high, and we mean really high, and low, and we mean stored deep underground in a cave low. Off the shelf? We don't go there. Off the beaten track, we certainly go there. And the best bit is, we even come to you. Order now at laithwaites.co.uk. Laithwaite's. We stop at nothing to bring you great wine.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:48. So, quite a week. All the rather strange hoo-ha about whether the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, will break her manifesto pledges and raise income tax. Then that incredibly embarrassing farce over the release by accident of 2 foreign sex offenders. And an important speech by Nigel Farage in which he formally buried many of his early and very large promises about tax giveaways. My panel today is Kate Ferguson, political editor of The Sun on Sunday, and Dan Bloom, political editor of Politico. Welcome to you both. Let's start with Rachel Reeves. Kate, I thought it was an extraordinary thing. We have never had a Chancellor making those kind of interventions 3 weeks before a budget.
Yeah, this kind of almost emergency-sounding press conference she gave, where she rolled the pitch for one thing and one thing only, and that is more big tax rises. I mean, I think after that speech this week, we can be in no doubt that that manifesto tax pledge, no rise in income, VAT or employee NICs, is dead and buried. Well, it's on the bonfire.
I'm very interested you say that, because it could be certainly a huge question mark hanging over it. But, we had Lucy Powell earlier today saying, they must not do this. And a lot of Labour MPs are in a state of some shock about the possibility. Dan, is it possible, therefore, that this is a sort of clever game? She puts the idea out there, she gets us all interested in it, then she sits back to see just how toxic it's going to be. And if it's too bad, she doesn't do it in the end.
Well, I want to know whether Lucy Powell would then do the next step, which is vote against the budget if it does break this this manifesto pledge. Because I think the same thing as Kate. The one message from that press conference this week was to tell the public, not just that we in the bubble already know that they're going to break the manifesto. It was to tell the public that they're going to do it too and pitch roll for that.
I do agree with you. I interviewed Rachel Reeves and I asked again and again and again, you're going to raise taxes, you're going to raise taxes. Are you going to raise taxes? Are you going to raise income tax? You're going to raise income tax. And there was no hint of don't be silly, Andrew, calm down. Not at all. It was fairly clear what message she was trying to get through.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would just be too clever by half to let us all think that, to do a whole Downing Street address, a very unusual measure by a chancellor just a few weeks out from a budget, and then say, jokes on you. That's just stupid politics, isn't it?
And it would make us look very silly as well, which would also be very bad for the nation.
I'm quite used to looking silly, but the one thing I think is that it might be just not quite as bad as they're pitch rolling for. So they still make a massive breach. They still kind of go far further than they said they would ever go, but just not quite as far as
There's no point in breaking your promise about income tax and then just raising it by 1p and not getting quite enough money. If they're going to do it, they might as well do it big, I think.
Or maybe they take 2p onto income tax and take it off national insurance or something like that.
That's so fiddly. I mean, I wrote a couple of weeks ago that we're looking at 2p on income. That's still what my money's on, because it strikes me that if you're going to break your manifesto pledge on tax, you want to make the money from it in one fell swoop. You don't want to be coming back next year. You don't want to be doing 7 billion by doing half a dozen here, half a dozen there.
Smorgasbord.
You don't want a smorgasbord. You want to be going big.
I mean, economically, this might well be the sensible thing to do. Everybody's in it together. Everybody takes a bit of pain, but she doesn't have to go for a business which is already struggling. She doesn't have to raise taxes on employers who are already reluctant to hire. And so it might be the sensible thing economically to do. But what do we all think about the political effects? Is this absolute death?
Well, one of my favourite Britney Spears songs is Toxic, and this will be toxic. She's going to be breaking a manifesto pledge. Her own personal commitment will be shredded. So there will be questions about whether or not she can carry on in the role. I personally don't see her resigning or being booted out immediately, but I do think this will be her credibility shredded. And, can Rachel Reeves, can Keir Starmer ever stand up again in front of a Labour manifesto and say, trust me, this is our manifesto promise, when you've broken the only one pretty much in your last manifesto?
So Kate Ferguson says toxic, Dan Bloom terminal.
Well, I think the issue is that her and Keir Starmer are very, very joined up about this. Yeah. If one goes, it makes it easier for the other to go. And, they meet every week to talk about the upcoming budget or whatever it is about the economy. They have these long, one-on-one meetings and stuff. They are doing the same plan. It's not quite, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng levels yet, but it's the same principle, that it's not like she's gone off and done something wrong. She's doing what he wants her to do. So if she has to go over this, then logically it follows that he would too.
There were hints that Number 10 is not totally happy with the way that she handled that day, that there was a sort of sense, I'm the Chancellor, therefore I'm not really in charge.
I think that, she is in charge, isn't she?
Well, exactly.
She is making these decisions, and Number 10 is fully in with it. I'm sure those hints haven't come from nowhere. I'm sure there is unhappiness in the building. But ultimately, the PM has set up this budget board where it's got his own economic advisor on it, and it's got, people from across Number 10 and Number 11. And the whole point is that they have more joined up decision making now.
I agree. I don't think we can ever see this as like a kind of rogue chancellor or a chancellor of a slightly different ilk to the PM doing their own thing. Are they going to butt heads? Even like Rishi and Boris had that friction at the end, which eventually led to Rishi going. They're joined at the hip. Always, all ministers can be sacked. The only one that can't be is the Prime Minister. But, I think this idea that there's a rift or some kind of fork in the road between them is wrong. Rachel and Keir are probably two ministers most in lockstep.
Yes. I suggested to Rachel that she might like to announce that she had to do it, but therefore had to break her promise, and as an honourable politician was going to step down as Chancellor of the Exchequer immediately afterwards. She didn't like the idea very much, I have to say.
Did she not?
She didn't. Let's move on to the other great big story of the week, which we've all covered, which is this sequence of releases by accident of people from prison. In 2 cases, sex offenders of foreign origin or one an asylum seeker, one being deported or in the process of being deported. What happens occasionally to governments is that they just have a really, really bad run of luck. Everything goes wrong day after day, hour after hour, and it's beginning to feel like that with this government.
Yes, and once you get that narrative, it feels a bit like meltdown in Downing Street. I thought the scenes at PMQs this week were both worrying, like genuinely worrying for the public, and also kind of thick of it levels farcical. So you had another prisoner let out by accident, another alleged sex attacker. You had a deputy PM who refused to say it. Mm-hmm. You know, despite being asked 5 times, then the news breaks at the end of PMQs that indeed there has been another accidental release. So that all looked kind of almost comedic, almost you couldn't write a satire that on the nose. But the broader point for the public, my readers, your listeners, will be that actually, why are there rocketing numbers of prisoners who are being accidentally released? Now, this has happened before, but the numbers have rocketed under Labour's watch. And
it seems to be something to do with the early release. Exactly. I was going to say that. Dan, what did you make of David Lammy's performance in the Prime Minister's questions? I mean, he was very, very angry. I think genuinely angry. Yeah. Chris Skidmore didn't count the right number of questions properly, I think. So he also had a little problem. But what did you make of it?
I mean, they had problems on both sides, but and there was also the Tory thing of asking about an asylum seeker, where technically it was a foreign criminal but not an asylum seeker. I do think that sort of pales in significance compared to David Lammy's problems. The way he dealt with those questions, where he was very haughty, he was very defensive. By the time he got to the 4th and 5th questions, all the journalists in the gallery are like, the Tories know something here. Okay, what's going on? All these reasons about, I didn't have the full facts at my disposal. I like to think terribly naively sometimes with this stuff and just think, well, why can't you say, I believe the Honourable Gentleman is referring to, a case details of which are about to be made public. It's irresponsible of me to freewheel on this at the dispatch box, but I'll give him an update momentarily straight after P&Qs as soon as I've spoken to my officials. That would have got him in a whole load of trouble, but would have gotten into less trouble than what he did.
I think the public and people like us probably underestimate just how difficult and stressful Prime Minister's question is, quite how fast you have to dance on your toes when those kinds of things happen. Sort of behind all of this, I guess, we're in a situation where Reform are 10 points ahead of everybody else, and we've got 4 parties clustered around the same kinds of polling. And so we're moving into a new kind of politics. And I thought the speech by Nigel Farage at the beginning of the week was highly significant, simply because he ditched so many unaffordable policies which were beginning to make Reform look, absolutely out of control on the economy. And thoughts from both of you on that?
I think the most interesting thing, I didn't go to Nigel Farage's speech, I admit. I did go to Richard Tice's speech last night. Mm-hmm. And at the same time as they've killed off this contract, this manifesto from last year, Richard Tice is going about kind of making free with raising the idea of doing things that cost billions and billions of pounds, or indeed save billions and billions of pounds, but not saying I'll definitely do it. He's talking about sort of scrapping, he's hinting at like scrapping cash ISAs. He's talking about scrapping inheritance tax entirely, even though that isn't actually Reform's policy at the moment. And lots of other things like that, changing defined benefit pensions for public sector workers, whatever.
And some
there's
quite,
a kind of give and take.
And some quite sort of tough stuff, like they are going to look again at the triple lock, which the main parties are too scared of voters to talk about.
I actually think it's super interesting. I mean, we were waiting for this speech by Reform by Nigel Farage to kind of whip their economic policy into a bit more shape. We all knew it was pie in the sky policy at the last election. Because they were this sort of insurgency party, no one took that seriously. So they needed to get this speech out of the way and do it. But the really interesting thing is, as these kind of insurgents, are they allowed to kind of think the unthinkable? Are they allowed to say they'll scrap the triple lock? Which, if they did, right, is something basically every government wants to do but are not brave enough to do.
Yeah, I wrote a big piece about the triple lock thing this week and the fact that everyone wants to do it and no one in the Labour or the Tories could admit it. And will reform give them permission or will they just start a horrible campaign against
I spoke to a cabinet minister about this and he said, well, it's the prisoner's dilemma, Andrew. Everybody knows what needs to be done, but nobody wants to move first. Anyway, we've run out of time. Thank you both very much, Dan and Kate. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on the free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion, put your news categories in the order you'd like them, pause, rewind live radio, listen to a range of podcasts. So download the all-new official LBC app free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ali Mirage.
Thanks, Andrew. Gangs of mass protest.